Hello, everyone. My name is Nadine Jones. I'm a student at Kennesaw State University in the Masters of Integrated Global Communication. Right now, I'm in Ireland completing my Summer Engagement Abroad module. I am at Failte Ireland in Dublin, and here with me is Alex Connolly, the Head of Communications for Failte Ireland. Hi, Alex.
Hello, everybody.
We have a couple of questions
Yeah.
here that we're going to talk about. So, Alex, can you tell me how long you've been in your position here?
Well, I've worked in Failte Ireland for about 10 years. Failte Ireland, as you know, is the National Tourism Authority of Ireland. And so for almost a decade, I've been the head of communications here. I've worked in public relations and corporate communications for about 23 years, 24 years. And most of my previous experience was actually in health sector public relations, which was a completely different ball game altogether. In the health services, when I worked there, it was very much about crisis management, reputational issue management, and a lot of it was quite reactive because of the nature of the sector. Whereas where I currently work, a lot of it's quite proactive, and the challenge in tourism isn't necessarily to deal with incoming issues, but it's actually to get out there on the pitch and actually promote tourism and get ourselves into the news and into the public debate.
Great. So, why did you choose this area of work? How did you choose communication?
Well, I sometimes wonder, did I choose this area of work or did it choose me? I think primarily for anybody out there who's thinking about it, personality is a big issue. It's a big part of it. You have to be, if I was to sum it up very quickly and succinctly, I think you have to be, first of all, you have to be a very curious person.
Mm-hmm.
You have to want to know what makes things work, what's the reason behind this decision. You have to be very curious about how the world works and how decisions are made and how people think and how people interact. So you have to have a natural curiosity. I also think you have to have a natural inclination towards communications. What I mean by that is, if you're a person who has a good sense of empathy, who's a good listener, that's equally important, if not more important, than just being a good speaker.
Mm-hmm.
I also think a personality that's very good at structuring their thoughts and structuring, how they want to convey a message. I think you have to have that kind of natural ability as well. So, I personally would have had, that would be part of my makeup, part of what makes me what I am, what makes me tick. And I mean, even previously, before I was a school teacher, and which is, I think, the most pure form of communications.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you think about it, you've got maybe complex messaging,
Mm-hmm.
you've got an audience right before you, and you've got a challenge. How do I message?
Mm-hmm.
How do I communicate to this audience? Now, of course, when you're a school teacher, you get instant feedback. What do you do then? If it's working, you reinforce what you're doing. If it's not working, you recalibrate and you retool. And those basic, simple principles are actually applicable to communications per se. So I ended up, I taught as a teacher for a while, then I ended up working in government because I always had an interest in policy and in how countries are run and how services are provided. But given my own natural makeup, I gravitated very quickly towards the corporate press end of things.
So, how do you believe this area of work is changing, and how do you think global communication, maybe within the tourism sector specifically, and then the greater global communication?
Well, I think technology is the easy answer. Look, when I started off as a junior press officer 20-something years ago, we still faxed out press releases. People didn't use emails. 12 years ago, Twitter came along. That's how recent that technology came. I think things have changed both in tourism and in communications. There's more, faster, and I suppose there's a lack now of, say, central authority around messaging. And that's not just in terms of the media. There are so many channels out there. Whereas previously, whether it was in America or Ireland, you would have 2 or 3 main news stations where everybody went to get their news, and you would have 4 or 5 leading national newspapers. Now people can get their news everywhere. So there is that proliferation, but also in terms of channels as well, there is so much more you can do. But the other thing as well, in terms of the authority issue, is that people are more cynical, are more questioning now of authority, and it can be a challenge now, even if the science or the, the medical fact or the tourism fact is black and white. If people don't want to believe it, they can find a channel out there to find another point of view. I think Patrick Moynihan, who was an American senator, once said, everyone is entitled to their own opinion, but they're not entitled to their own facts. But unfortunately nowadays, people are entitled to their own facts. So I think that loss of authority is a bigger challenge for communicators nowadays. And that applies not just in Ireland or in America, but globally, all around the world. Technology has driven that to some extent. And technology is a big challenge as well, because at the end of the day, there are three fundamental principles in communications. There's a message, there's an audience, and there's the delivery, right, which is the channels. I always say when I'm talking to people, you have to be a little bit mad. Message, audience, delivery, MAD. They're the three principles. So, messaging is still the same, but finding where your audience is now and how to deliver to them is the biggest challenge. And that's the biggest change I've seen in my career, because there was a time I just would have to put a story in a national newspaper, and most people I wanted to get to would get that story, they would hear our side of the story. That's not a given anymore. So how do you get to your audiences? Now, that all sounds bad, but it's not insurmountable. It just means that maybe you have to identify micro audiences, sub audiences, and then different channels and different ways of getting to them. It's harder work, but you can still get to them. And the upside of technology is it does give you lots of feedback as to who's reading your stuff. Are people engaging with your messages, which you wouldn't necessarily have had before? So there are upsides here as well, but the principles are still the same. You have a message, you have an audience, and the challenge is how do you deliver that message to the audience.
Great. So, what are 3 pieces of advice you would give to someone choosing to work in this field?
3 pieces of advice.
Or however many you would like to give.
Well, let me try and stick with 3. 3 pieces of advice. I think the first piece of advice I would give to people working in this field would be just ask yourself, look, is this something that suits your personality? Because I think you can be very exposed very quickly in communications if it's not suited to your skills and personality. Is this something that you would like to do? Is this something that you believe you would be naturally good at? Are you a good listener? Have you to promote or project your messages? And also, are you a structured thinker? I think that's sometimes overlooked. The most effective way of getting your messages across are basically to structure them and to craft them with an eye on impact and on changing people's perceptions or getting people to believe what you want them to believe or getting people to engage with whatever you're promoting. So the first piece of advice I would have is, look, analyze yourself. Is this an area for you? The second piece of advice I would have for people is always focus on your audience. Have that empathy with your audience, because sometimes, and I've seen it in many places where I've worked, people are caught up in the processes or in the deadlines or in some other aspect of the communications process, and they've lost sight of the audience. Because at the end of the day, if you haven't got sight of your audience or the person you're trying to communicate with, your message isn't going to land. It's not going to come across. So how do they talk? How do they speak? How do they think? What are their prejudices? What presses their buttons? Know all of this about your audience, and that will help you craft your message, and that will help you communicate effectively. So the second piece of advice I would have would be fully aware, be very aware of your audience. The third piece of advice I'd have is never be comfortable. Always be evolving. As I mentioned to you earlier, I started off in the days of fax machines, just after the days of the dinosaur, But I started off in those times, and I've seen immense change, and Like I'm 50 now, and I still challenge myself in terms of emerging media, social media, podcasting, everything. You really, really have to, it's just like working in tech now, communications. It's very like working in tech industries. You have to keep your skill levels up all the time. Go back to, finding that audience, understanding your audience, engaging with your audience. The channels are changing all the time, and it's really, really important that you keep up to speed on emerging trends, emerging channels, and emerging technology. I advise anybody who's going into communications to always be awake, for want of a better word. Always be and always be excited. Always be excited about new opportunities and new ways to communicate, because that's what keeps us alive and gets us out of bed in the morning.
All right. Well, thank you, Alex, for sitting down with me.